Hi everybody, welcome to the North Cascades. I'm camping and learning from Bob Miller, Mike Eddy, Stacia Gordon. Mixture of road outcrops and backcountry hiking. This is a constant, as I listen to Bob talk, for instance, and look at a quad like this, it's a constant battle between thinking on a huge scale and then coming down and dealing with kind of some details. And of course both are important and all sorts of mid-levels as well, but how are you processing what Bob is saying, not only here but other places? Like, are you on the edge of every word and like, oh, I've got to go sample that, I got to get a date on that, I got to get a date on that? Or do you have a clear plan here as you're kind of continuing to look at maps like these?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's definitely some like iteration that goes on. I guess I fall more in the camp of, I'm really interested in like the big structures.
Yes,
so, like,
okay.
For example, on this map, this Ross Lake fault zone, this sort of tan color that's forming this long line here, is the really big, obvious structure here.
Okay.
And in terms of our proposed research, we have some evidence that it was really rocking along, like really moving during the Eocene magmatic flare-up, but that it got truncated during the same event. So if that makes, I guess.
So what evidence do you have that it was trucking? Is that you, or is that somebody previous work saying?
Yeah, so Sam dated a myelinite, I guess, in here. So let's say a sill, like a magmatic sill, that really got stretched out in the fault zone. And so any deformation that it soaked up had to postdate the age of emplacement.
Yeah.
And so he got a date of, say, 4950. We're going to redate it now using modern techniques.
Okay.
But so that's like 4950. And then we have this big Pluton, which is largely non-deformed.
Yep.
And that appears to just truncate that structure at, say, 49.1.
Same date.
It's basically the same day, yeah.
Okay.
And so what's interesting to me is this transition from really having this thing rocket along, really strongly deforming things in that fault zone or shear zone, and then just stopping it. And so in terms of our proposed research, it's sort of like, if you're injecting a lot of melt into an area, it gets really weak. And so this transition is really interesting because we're putting a lot of magma, some melt, so a liquid, in this area, and you'd think it would just lubricate these shear zones, but it also, once it crystallizes, locks it up, because then it's, it's like putting oil on the fault zone, but then that oil turns into steel, right? It's just sort of like locks it up. And so that transition is really, I think, one of the big interesting questions is why does that happen? Is it that magmatic input starts falling off, or what? Yeah. Why did this structure seem to get locked up? Why did it get locked up by the Cooper Mountain batholith? So I guess when I look at the map, the big question for me is this transition coming in right here.
Heading northwest compared to the other side.
Yeah, moving like this.
Yeah.
And I think the lineations here, Bob has measured a lot of those, and they plunge, say, 30 degrees to the southeast.
Okay.
Okay, and so if you are
Come on.
moving, if you're moving the structure and the lineations are plunging to the southeast, then you're getting sort of normal oblique.
Uh-huh.
And so that would be dropping this down relative to this block and moving it to the southeast, and this one's going to the northwest.
And at the same time the exhumation is happening?
Yes. Yeah.
So that's all at the tail end of this. We're 49-ish, where this comes in, we put the brakes on this potentially. You're going to try to get a better date, but you'd be shocked if it was 2 million years either way, away from 49 and Sam's date.
Yeah, so at that point in time, they were dissolving tens of zircon per analysis.
Yeah.
And so the potential to mix in like an older zircon is high.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, in general, I would not expect the date for that orthoneiss to get older than
Okay.
what he determined.
So that's the tail end of the big shearing, but who knows when the shearing began? Or are you saying that also initiated around this time?
So that's really hard to determine. So you can think about the rocks in here, they're all getting deformed, and it
Yeah.
can happen over a long period of time. And we can date the youngest deformed rock in here, and we know that some deformation happened after that.
After.
But it's really hard to prove that deformation was happening prior to that. Because you could always just say it all happened very young.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the issue. So we know this thing was active by 4950, and we know it got shut off at 49. We suspect that it was probably active much longer than that.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing that's very challenging to prove.
Got it.
Baja BC, if there are faults around here, then one would imagine, if you look at the San Andreas system of the day, it's not one single fault. So it's hard to imagine, 1,000 kilometers on any fault, because unless it's an oceanic transform, that would require it to be, you take what percent is it? Like 7% is a figure. If you have a fault that's 100 kilometers long, there's 7 kilometers of strike slip on average. People, plot these out, curves and things. So, anyway, so one might expect there'd be a distributed dextral shear system. So if that were the case, I think this fault zone we're looking at here might be the type of fault. Maybe it has 10 kilometers of slip, 20. It's not going to get you 1,000, but if you have enough of them, plus a big one, that would be the argument. Or there's some wrong with the paleomag and metal, and that's not really part of Baja BC as we think it is. Smith Canyon, that was one of the faults.
Yeah.
I don't know if Barksdale named it or my students named it. But that goes pretty far.
On the top or the bottom.
Yeah, it's a big, brittle structure. It's hard to...
But with all being in this newbie, there's not much to determine stratigraphy on. Going up to that McClure Mountain thrust, which itself, I don't know how that fits in. Use my students mapping there. By the way, McClure Mountain
Cool sample.
is where the first wolf pack was ever.
See a lovely
Wolves
little
in
fold
Washington
right there.
were right on McClure Mountain where they
the
actually saw a den.
introductions.
Yeah. No, where they migrated.
So it's these kinds of rocks that tell us we're on the Ross Lake Fault Zone.
That tell us we're on this Gold Creek shear zone.
Gold Creek Shear Zone.
Yeah. So that's.
We're not on the,
So the
yeah,
Ross Lake is like this,
Uh-huh.
and we're on
Got
probably
it.
this structure.
got
So
it.
this is one I was saying, it's pretty impressive shear zone because most of these rocks are just massive sediments and
Yeah.
bedding in them and everything like that.
Yeah,
And then they get this intense foliation. So, because there's nothing to match up on each side. It looks like it's newbie.
yeah,
But, you might have 10, 15 kilometers of dextral slip. And if you have, it looks like a bigger one
Mhm.
that isn't really exposed on this road that's in the alluvium. You could have another 20, 30 kilometers on it.
Yeah.
It adds up.
Yeah.
And they are dextral. And we were skeptical and all that we were talking about.
Poo-pooed.
Almost ruined him as a scientist. It turns out
The volcanic part.
he's had this grudge going on. I'm a little worried about it. I didn't know he'd been simmering for.
Day.
I didn't know he'd been simmering for eight or 9 years. Whatever Sam and I said, which I kind of forgot it was raining, is what I remembered. And they weren't very inspiring rocks. But anyway, if those are really at the surface, then that would be. I mean, if they really volcanic, that would be pretty cool. Case.
So they are, or they are not, or we haven't gotten there? Or?
Well,
I thought they were.
Evidently Sam and I didn't, so that's what happened. You didn't make a strong enough case. You didn't argue with it.
Ralph and Roland thought they were. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess.
Some heavy hitters there.
Oh, yeah.
Is that the speculative volcanic that we sampled during the backpack?
What do you think? Think that's the other one? I think so.
I think that's the Brian Butte stock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't have that volcanic on this map. It would be
Somewhere in the
right
trail.
in here.
In there.
Yeah.
Turns out there's a lot of rocks up here in the North Cascades. Who knew?
You exercise on it.
Yeah.
That was one of those people who wasn't fast like Mike. But
Yeah.
As I got older, I didn't slow down much.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm just looking at this little bits of stuff up here. Stacia, about how much of the Skagit gneiss, and I guess I know all of it too, but how much is Metamorphosis plutonic rock, orthogneiss, and how much of it is melted sediment or is metasediment. So Mish was heavy on the metasediment side, and I guess Donna was too, and we're probably more higher percentage orthogneiss, but still there is metasediment and how it melted and all these things. That stuff Stacia can tell you much more about, but just as a broad view, this is part of this whole debate that goes on almost every outcrop.
Did Mish think that most of the Skagit gneiss was?
I don't know if he thought most was, but he worked mostly along Highway 20.
That's what I was gonna say.
And he wanted to metasomatize some of those things with sprouting blast. So he definitely thought there was more metasediment.
Yeah, and I'd say one of the bigger arguments is when you see the white layers, the leucosome in these rocks, is whether that's in situ, in place partial melting, or whether it's metamorphic differentiation, where during metamorphism you segregate into the darker versus lighter bands, or whether it's injections from melt from outside of the outcrop. And so there's been lots of different papers on that throughout the North Cascades, where most people argued early it was metamorphic differentiation, and it wasn't until Donna got her PT data that argued you were at high enough conditions that it could undergo partial melting.
And then coming down here, we tended to find, or at least the people I was working with, our group, we were finding a lot more just pretty homogeneous things that looked like they were plutons that got strongly deformed, and they were all on strike with the rocks up on Highway 20 where most of the work was done for access reasons, and there's spectacular migmatites there.
Yeah.
And I guess I was more coming from that perspective on a really high percentage of plutonic rock. And I think Ralph and Roland estimated 75%, something like that, was metamorphosed plutonic rock in their 1991 paper. So, there's been but we've come up with Sam, as we talked about, and he's, was always a skeptic, just partly to be skeptic, about anything we called a metasediment. Is that fair statement?
Yeah, which I agree with.
Yeah, I agree. It was a good idea. We are
very
always
hard to
questioning.
tell.
Yeah, and so there's a lot that's ambiguous.
And part of the significance of if it's a metasediment and it's undergoing in situ melting is once you have about 7% partial melt, the strength of the rock dramatically drops and it becomes quite weak. And so then you put that into the bigger picture of the rheology of this crustal section of an arc, and it's important to know whether it's partial melting or not in these rocks.
And what percentage you say? Yeah. So we were looking at these biotitic concentrations, whether some of that was metasediment, and then how much is injected, Stacia was pointing out. So anyway, it's a big question, and so this outcrop kind of encapsulates it to a certain degree.
Huh.
We're not getting on this elevation. That rock maybe some metasediment, but fairly risocratic.
I would agree.
It's not thermogenic by nice, nothing. Like what foliar?
Yeah.
Later. Did she have garnet on her vanity plates on her car?
No, that Brad has
I know, and Paul has Baja BC in his license plate.
He does?
Oh yeah, he's had that forever. So when he started leaning towards Mojave after Kirsten's paper, I asked him, I said, why aren't you changing it to Mojave BC? Get too lazy. So I wonder how much he spent over, I don't know, at least 15 years. Had the Baja BC. How much money that cost him.
In case you didn't hear that, Paul Umhofer in Arizona has a personalized license plate, Baja BC, on his license plate for the last 15 years. That's dedication.
Nothing spectacular. Hard to say whether this is in place or not anyway. I think I was pretty conservative on what was outcrop coming up this. I find out it's coming up in the range between this drainage and Albany Creek. Proverbial gray gneiss.
another mystery rock in the North Cascades.
God, yeah.
Well, it's been dated in one location. The question is whether all these relatively fine-grained gray gneisses are all the same.
On this trip so far, if people are arguing, or if you're saying some of this is metasedimentary, are we involving that?
Potentially, yeah. I don't think it went all the way down the subduction zone necessarily. I think it was in the forearc and then was underthrust into at least the mid-crustal levels.
Okay, that's coming back. Thank you.
And part of that is just because we think that the arc crust was at least 55 kilometers thick at one point, and we're not looking at those paleo depths in most of the rocks, and more at like 30 to 40 kilometer depths are what are exposed today. So there very well could be more sediment that went down and kind of underplated or relaminated at the base of the arc, but we don't have those levels to look at.
So yeah, and I guess there's no suggestion it's like the Shucks and Blue Schist, which looks like a high pressure, low temperature kind of rock that would, these are medium pressure, deep pressure, but high temperature. There's no real evidence that they ever were down the tubes and then got popped back up into the crust, as Stacia said.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. But along the Ross Lake fault zone, some of those sediments we think are from the back arc, from the Metau, or what's in a back arc position today, and that got incorporated in step over zones within the Ross Lake fault.
You don't have to comment on our smell.
It adds to the ambiance, Mike.
Yeah, there's a combination laundromat, shower, and twist
Okay,
that you can go into for years.
excellent.
It's right next to the grocery store, everything you need. More or less.
Plus cinnamon twist, of course. Have you been there? The bakery? Oh. It's a good stop to make when in Twist.
Excellent. Oh, and twist. Yes, I have. Yeah.
Yeah, Bob always gives me a hard time about knowing where all the baked goods are in the North Cascades.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah, exactly. You're out there hiking all day. You deserve a sweet treat today.
Right. So you guys are really hunting for garnets. That's one really treasure hunt type thing. What's the payoff for you guys?
Is it allows us to then calculate pressures and temperatures from these rocks. And that's where, as you go to the south, we just don't have as much of that information. And so the question is, all the rocks along Highway 20 or this 8 to 10 kilobar pressure range.
How deep
is
it
it
down here?
Yeah.
So, and how does it change from north to south? So,
Thanks.
yeah.
Slow motion. Work with the camera.
We'll go for another. Okay. Couldn't do it. Oh, they're so good.
If I could tell you something, you might believe me. Waterfall isn't going to be as spectacular. Waterfall Material.
What are you seeing there? I'm over your other shoulder here. Can you show us what you're looking at?
A lot of quartz and plagioclase, with little biotypes defining the foliation. No garnet, I might add.
Wah,
Disappointing.
wah.
So it looks like a pretty leucocratic, what was once melt rock.
Thank you.
Great pieces.
So generous, Bob.
Pretty similar.
Yeah.
Has some more biotite rich zones. So you've got your foliation kind of coming like that, and then we have these layers of biotite kind of curving around.
Oh yeah, very cool. Remind me, Alex, are you going to be working on rocks like these?
I'm hoping we can find some metasediments with garnets for me to get some pressures and temperatures from.
So not this.
I'll probably do some work on rocks like these, but I'm mainly focused on metasediments.
Okay, got it. Cool. Boy. You got I've been noticing you. What are you working on here?
It's sausage I picked up in Twist.
It looks good.
Yeah, it's good. Block of cheese and some sausage. It's
That'll work.
lunch. Kind of nibble on it all day.
Yeah, I had a thought. Regardless if we have minor strike slip faults here or major ones, they're all cut by the straight creek, aren't they?
Yes.
Everybody agrees on that?
Yes.
So we can't be doing anything younger than 50 with major
Yes.
translation?
So, well, it depends on when you want the straight creek. Well, when the straight creek fault started. So if you link the Teanaway dike orientations to motion on the straight creek fault, then it's going by say 49 MA. I think I'm a little bit more comfortable with by 45.
It's starting. Straight Creek starting 45.
Yeah. But, it's kind of gets a little wishy-washy in there.
But kind of important if you want major action on these structures through here, the timing of it.
Yeah, so I mean one question is when there's a fundamental change of stresses at the plate boundary, sort of like how do you end up localizing that on a big fault? So, Pacific North America is localized in the San Andreas. But, here we had all these pre-existing structures, and apparently they went for a few more million years before things got localized in the Straight Creek, and that started soaking up all the deformation.
But staying at that scale, we're not starting any of these structures in through here unless we accrete Silesia.
Well, yeah.
You just want to eat your sausage. Like, get out of my face, man.
That gets into this question of how do you demonstrate older motion. Really what we can do when we go into a deformed zone is it's fairly straightforward to figure out the last motion. And so I think Bob and Paul are very comfortable with the Ross Lake Fault Zone having a very long history. And it's big, and it's a big zone of deformed rocks. And I agree it's got to be a major structure, but how far back we can take it, it gets a little bit more complicated. And I think their best argument for Cretaceous motion is correlating it to fault in BC and using some constraints up there.
Yeah.
I mean, that'd be a good question for Bob.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to demonstrate a protracted history if the youngest thing kind of obliterates the earlier record.
Well, it's not crazy to say there's major motion in just a couple of million years. This far inboard.
So we know that at least some rocks were emplaced and really ripped up here in the Ross Lake Fault Zone. Over just a couple million years, and then it turns off.
But we don't know when it started.
But we don't know when it started, yeah.
By making correlations with faults in British Columbia, we argued for 105 or 115 kilometers of motion on the Ross Lake Fault Zone. So, but that's based on correlations across the Straight Creek Fraser Fault.
Right.
So, some work that I guess Paul had done with another colleague up in the Tyalton Basin, way northwest.
A lot of these major structures would have 10, 20, 30 million years of activity.
They could, yeah.
They could, but possibly if some of this high precision stuff comes through, it could be a lot of motion in much less time.
Yeah, it could. It certainly could be punctuated, and that there really is difficult, and that's often the case with faults. You can date the oldest rock it cuts, but maybe it started moving and there were no older rocks to be deformed, right? Or preserved.
Right.
So here we can show pretty tightly that it was 50 to 48. We had a lot of motion, and same with the Eniat fault. Some of the work that Mike did with the Eniat, well, with the basin in terms of the timing of the tufts.
Yeah.
You were there.
Yeah.
So we can say when it was active during chumpstick time, but it continues northwards into the metamorphic rocks, and we need to do more work or get lucky to know how much slip occurred before the time that we can document it. And that's the tricky thing with faults. And the San Andreas, with the 1906 earthquake, there was a lot of interest, but there was debate about whether it was even a right lateral strike slip fault in some places, and how much slip until well into the second half of the 20th century.
Really?
And you get lucky, and the best thing you have there is Pinnacles National Park, which is a volcanic center that just happened to get chopped off in half by the fault, and with the plate motions, it's just about the age when the San Andreas should have started from plate reconstructions. And you see a similar volcanic center, or half a volcanic center, down around Palmdale, which is in the desert, southern California, and they geochemically match up and everything. So yeah, they get, you can get, with all that work and easy access in California, it was a long time before there was much idea of even something as fundamental as the San Andreas fault. So even though the Ross Lake Fault Zone is more important than the San Andreas, it hasn't received that kind of study yet.
Well, by God, we're going to change that, huh,
Yeah.
Bob?
Yeah, we're trying. They may have to continue that after I'm gone.
After we're all gone, I guess.
Yeah. But yeah, that is kind of a neat story in California, just how you have that one volcano that gets sliced perfectly, and people done geochemistry, geochronology on both sides, and they confirm it, and it works out beautifully.
Oh yeah, you'll have to come up with a name for yourselves.
Were you asking me something? You're asking if you wanted cheese. Oh, I'm waiting for Bob to get it out, but thank you.
Oh. Was I supposed to bring that to you?
You guys want some smoked Swiss?
Maybe.
You guys, I can.
Gotta meet me halfway here.
You want white cheddar?
Thank you.
bet.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
No. I want to go jump in that creek.
You're a creek jumper.
It's a little warm today, a little humid.
Thing to think. Maybe just walk up and look at, I have stations up here. Just
Sure.
go another half mile maybe.
Sure.
And then seeing down here and what I did a number of years ago. We do have data there, but you can see the much higher density of data, or stations at least.
Pretty similar looking rock to the last time. Quartz plagioclase with the biotite forming the foliation. But nothing else too exciting within there.
Good.
Hot sunshine then.
It's like intermediate volcanics that hadn't saturated in zircon.
I think so.
Okay.
Dirty sandstones. They should have zircons, huh?
So where were you finding good zircons for your Skagit papers?
Highway 20.
Oh God, it was always come back to that.
I know.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it was pretty easy to find zircons and samples there.
Highway 20.
It's different than the stuff down below. Doesn't have the same stringers.
Just this one here, I guess that's a dozen. Well, I guess we can cogitate on that as we walk.
I think so. Turned into the subtleties here, guys. I'm gonna do a left-handed.
And action.
I think he's ready for the chain gang in jail. He just breaks them off. He's got a lot of experience.
We'll turn this into sand.
So this is MF, ME, or something like that.
Can be, yeah.
It's G21-25. C205. Okay.
You said NC205.
Yeah.
You've probably got a thin section, I reckon.
No, I don't know about that. I have a sample from 207, so I doubt I would have sampled so close together.
Guilty when you nod yes.
I don't know how you actually.
No guilt.
That's a good question. Stacia, when you orient
Yeah.
with your compass,
Yeah.
do you do it like I do with a right-hand rule, or do you do something different?
That was way off.
I guess I don't worry about it because I'm writing down the dip direction and I just make a straight line.
But you do make a strike.
Yeah. But I write down dip direction.
Yeah. This face looks like it'd probably be easier from. Well, we're just ending up with parts of it, right?
Step one. Pretty hard.
So we're not getting deep. We gotta go for like the deep sample now.
Yeah.
I looked at it.
But don't you think it's good to have the deep over here?
Oh, of course I do.
Yeah.
Is that how many samples do you bring in?
Well, so now I don't know, like we do garnet dating. Maybe we want most of a lot of this.